The fire burned to the farmhouse with ferocity that left nothing but charred beams and smoldering ruins. By the time the neighbors arrived, there was little left but blackened rubble and 4 bodies. 3 were unmistakably children, their small forms barely recognizable. The 4th, believed to be Belle Gunness herself, was found headless. The discovery sent shockwaves through LaPorte, Indiana, but as authorities sifted through the ruins, they unearthed something even more horrifying. A pit in the hog pen held secrets more gruesome than anyone could have imagined. But before the fire, before the bodies, Belle Gunness had a past steeped in blood. Born in 1859 in Selbu, Norway, Brynhild Paulsdatter Storseth was an unremarkable farm girl with big ambitions. She longed for wealth and a life beyond the struggles of poverty. When she emigrated to the United States in 1881, she transformed herself into Belle Gunness, a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and was willing to kill for it. By 1884, she had settled in Chicago and married Mad Sorensen. The couple owned a small candy store, but tragedy struck when it mysteriously burned down. Oddly enough, they had recently taken out insurance. With the payout in hand, Belle and Mads planned for a better future, but fate, or rather, Belle, had other plans. On July 30th, 1900, the only day when Mads' 2 life insurance policies overlapped, he suddenly died. The official cause was recorded as heart failure, though some suspected poisoning. Belle collected the insurance money and moved on without hesitation. LaPorte, Indiana, was her next stop. She used her insurance windfall to purchase a large farm, a sprawling piece of land with fields, a barn, and a hog pen. Soon after, she married Peter Gunness, a respected butcher and widower with children of his own. But life with Belle proved deadly. Within a year of their marriage, Peter met a gruesome fate. One cold December night in 1902, Belle claimed a meat grinder had fallen from a shelf and crushed his skull. The neighbors whispered. It seemed impossible for such an accident to occur. Peter's own daughter, a young girl wise beyond her years, openly accused Belle of murder. Then, just days later, the little girl vanished. Belle, now a twice-widowed woman of means, collected yet another life insurance payout. Alone with her surviving children, she set her sights on expanding her wealth. That was when the men began arriving at the farm. Belle had a method, a deadly one. Through personal ads in Scandinavian language newspapers, she lured men to her farm with the promise of love, companionship, and a prosperous future. Comely widow, owner of large farm in one of Indiana's finest districts, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with view of joining fortunes. No triflers need apply. For lonely, hard-working immigrants, it was an opportunity too good to pass up. They arrived one by one, eager for a new life, and, unbeknownst to them, their doom. Belle instructed them to bring their life savings and cash and, upon arrival, encouraged them to write letters home stating they were happy and settling in well. Then they vanished. By 1906, Belle's farm had become a trap for unsuspecting suitors. She was meticulous. These men were never seen leaving. She likely drugged them, then butchered their bodies with the skill of a seasoned farmer. Some she buried, others she fed to her pigs. For years, no one questioned the disappearances. After all, these were single men with no strong ties. But then, in 1908, something changed. One man, a suitor named Andrew Helgillian, was determined to uncover the truth, and the fire that consumed Belle Gunness' farmhouse was about to reveal horrors beyond anyone's darkest fears. The ruins of the Gunness farmhouse still smoldered when Sheriff Albert Smutzer stepped onto the scorched earth. The sight of the 4 bodies, one of which was allegedly Belle Gunness, should have answered the town's most pressing question: what happened to the widow of LaPorte? But instead, it only raised more. Belle's supposed corpse was headless, making positive identification nearly impossible. Had she been murdered by an unknown assailant before the fire? Or was this something more sinister? Had Belle Gunness staged her own death and vanished into the night? The answers lay beneath the farm. As law enforcement sifted through the wreckage, one of Belle's former farmhands, Ray Lamphere, found himself at the center of the investigation. He had worked for Belle for years and had once been her lover, but after falling out, She had fired him and later accused him of threatening her. Some believed he had set the fire in a jealous rage, but others weren't so sure. On April 27, 1908, just days after the fire, an investigative team began digging near the hog pen, following a tip from a desperate man, Asahel Gillian, the brother of one of Belle's missing suitors. He had received letters from his brother Andrew, who had visited Belle's farm and then vanished without a trace. Asa refused to believe Andrew had simply moved on. He demanded answers. It didn't take long to find them. The first shovel struck something solid. The men dug deeper. Then, the stench hit them, decay, unmistakable and horrifying. Moments later, a body was pulled from the earth. It was a man, dismembered, his remains stuffed into a burlap sack. Then came another, and another. By the time they stopped digging, they had uncovered at least 11 bodies. Most of the men who had come seeking love, but instead found a brutal, grisly end. Some were hacked apart, others had their skulls crushed, and some were mere bones, stripped clean by the pigs. The media erupted with horror. The La Porte Ghoul became front-page news, and crowds swarmed the farm, desperate for a glimpse of the House of Death. The story was unlike anything they'd ever heard. A widow who seduced men, robbed them, then butchered them. But as investigators tried to make sense of the carnage, an even more baffling question emerged. Was Belle Gunness among the dead, or had she escaped justice? Sheriff Smutzer examined the corpse believed to be Belle Gunness. It was a woman's torso, badly burned, but something about it seemed off. Despite the fire damage, it was noticeably smaller than Belle, who was known to be a large, heavy-set woman. Those who had seen her in life whispered their doubts. This body seemed too short, too slight. And most disturbingly, Belle's head was missing. Had someone planted a body in the fire to fake her death? Then there was Ray Lamphere, under intense interrogation. The disgraced farmhand insisted he had nothing to do with the killings. Yes, he had loved Belle. Yes, he'd been jealous. But murder? Arson? No, he was innocent. At least, that's what he said at first. But soon he changed his story. In jail, Lamphere finally broke. He claimed that Belle had planned everything. She had deliberately set the fire and vanished before it could consume her. According to him, Belle had lured a woman to her farm days before and killed her, using her corpse as a stand-in. Then, on the night of the blaze, Belle had taken her money, donned a disguise, and disappeared into the darkness. But where had she gone? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some swore they had seen Belle boarding a train, heading west. Others believed she had fled to Chicago, blending into the crowds. And then there were the more gruesome theories, that she had staged everything, only to die at the hands of an accomplice who would silence her forever. But one thing was certain. The headless body in the ruins wasn't enough to close the case. With law enforcement under mounting pressure, the search for Belle intensified. Detectives scoured rail stations, questioned former acquaintances, and followed every lead. Some believed she had returned to Norway, vanishing into her homeland under a new identity. Others were convinced she was still in the United States, watching the chaos from afar, amused at how easily she had deceived them all. For decades, sightings of Belle Gunness were reported from coast to coast. She was spotted in New York, then California, then South Dakota. But each lead came to nothing. And then, in 1931, more than 2 decades after her supposed death, police in Los Angeles arrested an aging woman named Esther Carlson for poisoning a man to steal his money. Witnesses claimed she looked eerily like Belle Gunness. Was this finally the end of the La Porte murderess? Or had she eluded justice once again? Los Angeles, 1931. Detectives stared at the frail woman in the interrogation room. Her name was Esther Carlson, arrested for poisoning a man in a scheme eerily similar to Belle Gunness' past crimes. But what chilled investigators wasn't just the method, it was her face. The resemblance to Belle was uncanny. Even in old age, the same piercing eyes, the same heavy-set frame, the same cold, calculating stare. Could it be her? Could the infamous Black Widow of La Porte, thought dead for more than 2 decades, have resurfaced under a new identity? And if so, what else had she done in those missing years? Back in Indiana, long-forgotten case files were pulled from storage. Reports, newspaper clippings, letters from desperate families searching for missing loved ones. Belle Gunness had left a trail of destruction too large to ignore. But one file stood out. It was an interview, buried among the evidence, from Clara Carlson, a housekeeper who had once worked on Belle's farm. When questioned in 1908, Clara had been hesitant, her words carefully chosen. She had claimed to know nothing. But a newly uncovered document, a second never-released statement, told a different story. In it, Clara described nights of terror. She had seen Belle dragging heavy sacks toward the pig pen in the dead of night. She had heard the screams, muffled, desperate, cut short. She had seen Belle with strange men who were never seen again. But most chilling of all, Clara recalled one evening when Belle pulled her aside, her voice low and threatening. "You talk, and you'll end up just like them." Frightened for her life, Clara had fled Lawport and vanished. Now, decades later, this forgotten testimony added fuel to a growing suspicion. Had Belle Gunness truly died in that fire, or had she orchestrated the perfect escape? The original doubts about the burned body found in Belle's home resurfaced. Autopsy reports from 1908 had already suggested discrepancies. The corpse was smaller, thinner than Belle had been in life. But back then, the case had been rushed. The town wanted closure. Now, with new forensic techniques available, authorities exhumed the remains for re-examination, and the results were shocking. The skeleton did not match Belle Gunness' known features. The bone structure, the dental records, none of it aligned. The woman who had died in the fire was someone else entirely. Belle Gunness had fooled them all. But why had this truth remained buried for so long? As investigators pushed deeper, they stumbled onto something even more unsettling. A pattern of ignored reports, dismissed testimonies, and suspiciously closed investigations. Had Belle Gunness been protected? Some whispered that Belle had powerful connections. Men who had benefited from her crimes. Corrupt officials, businessmen who had once answered her personal ads, but had survived, keeping her secrets. Had someone helped her escape? There was another theory. The fire that consumed Belle's farmhouse had been too perfectly timed. Just as a man, Asahel Gillian, was closing in on her with questions about his missing brother. Was it possible that Belle hadn't just fled, but that she had been warned to run? And if she had help, how many more people had known the truth? Just when authorities thought they were close to unraveling the truth, a key figure disappeared. A retired Lawport deputy, Oscar Lindquist, had come forward, claiming to have information about the night of the fire. But before he could speak with authorities, he vanished without a trace. His home was found abandoned, his car still parked in the driveway. His personal effects were untouched, as if he had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. Had someone silenced him? The more investigators dug, the darker the mystery became. If Belle Gunness had truly escaped in 1908, how far would she, or those protecting her, go to keep the truth hidden? And then, in a chilling breakthrough, authorities made a final, grisly discovery, one that suggested Belle's reign of terror had never truly ended. The discovery was enough to send shockwaves through the town of Lawport. Hidden beneath the crumbling foundation of Belle Gunness' farmhouse, authorities had unearthed a secret chamber, its walls lined with old, faded newspaper clippings, photographs, and a single chilling artifact, a blood-stained journal. The journal had once belonged to Belle herself, and as investigators flipped through its pages, they realized the horror that unfolded on her farm was far greater than anyone had imagined. The entries, written in Belle's sharp, meticulous handwriting, chronicled her systematic manipulation of each man she had lured to her farm. But what shocked the authorities most wasn't just her cold method. It was a confession she'd made in the final pages. "I will never be caught. No one will ever find me." As the pieces fell into place, something even more terrifying became clear. Belle had not been acting alone. Her journal revealed that she had an accomplice, someone who had helped her conceal the bodies and orchestrate her escapes. The name, however, was absent, leaving only a haunting trail of unanswered questions. The news spread quickly. Lawport, once a quiet, sleepy town, was now at the epicenter of a terrifying truth that no one could escape. The media descended like a swarm of vultures, and the locals, already haunted by the mystery surrounding Belle Gunness, now found themselves staring into the face of a new nightmare. Had Belle survived the fire? Was she still alive? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen her in Chicago, others in New York. There were whispers of sightings in the hills of Tennessee, and even as far west as Oregon. But no matter where the stories led, Belle remained an elusive phantom, her legend growing more horrifying with each passing day. But there was no time to investigate every lead. The truth was out. Belle Gunness had committed more murders than anyone had ever realized. The question now was, how many more had she killed, and where was she hiding? Sheriff Smutzer knew time was running out. The town was in chaos, and the pressure to bring Belle to justice was growing unbearable. Yet, despite his best efforts, each clue only seemed to lead to more dead ends. In a desperate move, he called in a team of federal agents, hoping that their resources and expertise could turn the tide. But just as they were preparing to track down Belle's possible hiding places, a new lead emerged. A witness had come forward. The woman, Irene Johansson, claimed to have known Belle when she was living in Chicago. Irene described Belle as a woman who could charm the skin off a snake. According to Irene, Belle had been very open about her past, even bragging about her ability to get rid of things without anyone noticing. But the most shocking revelation came when Irene revealed that Belle had spoken of a secret hideout, a place where no one would ever think to look. This hideout, as Irene recalled, was located in the dense forests of northern Michigan, far from the prying eyes of the world. Just as Sheriff Smutzer and his team prepared to move out, a new twist to the case surfaced, a shocking confession from an unexpected source. Ray Lamphere, the man who had once been a suspect in the murders and who had maintained his innocence for years, had finally come clean. In a handwritten letter sent from his prison cell, Lamphere revealed the unthinkable. I wasn't the only one. Belle wasn't the only killer. There was someone else, the one who kept her secret all along. He was there the night the fire started, and he made sure no one would ever find out. But now I know, the man who helped Belle was my own brother. The letter sent chills down the spine of every lawman involved. Lamphere's brother, George, had long been suspected of having connections to Belle's operations. But the confession tied him directly to the murders, and it painted a terrifying picture. The bloodshed wasn't just a result of Belle's twisted ambitions. It was a product of a partnership of death, one that spanned across years in multiple states. The search for Belle Gunness now had a face, George Lamphere. His role in the murders hadn't been clear, but with his brother's confession, the investigation was on. The authorities tracked George to a small cabin in the woods of Michigan, near the rumor hideout. The air was thick with tension as Smutzer and his team approached the cabin, the sound of their boots crunching on the frosty ground. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every movement a threat. They surrounded the cabin. The door creaked open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It wasn't Belle. It was George Lamphere, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, standing in the shadows, was an elderly woman, her face obscured, her features hidden by a dark scarf. As Smutzer stepped forward, something about her seemed hauntingly familiar. A chilling thought crossed his mind. Could it be? The woman stepped forward, pulling the scarf from her face. It was Belle Gunness. She smiled, cold, calculating, and unrepentant. As Belle's cold eyes locked with Smutzer's, the weight of years of horror, of death, of destruction, all seemed to settle into that one gaze. There was no remorse, no regret, just a hollow emptiness that had consumed everything in her life. "You're too late, Sheriff." Belle's voice was as chilling as it was calm. "I've always been 2 steps ahead of you." But her confidence faltered as the law closed around her. In the final moments, the full scope of Belle Gunness' terror seemed to collapse in on itself. The woman who had escaped justice for so long had nowhere left to run. And yet, the mystery was far from over. What had Belle done to ensure her survival? Who else was involved? What other dark secrets had she kept buried beneath the bloodied soil of Lockport? The arrest of Belle Gunness sent shockwaves through the nation. After decades of eluding capture, the infamous Black Widow was finally in the custody of the authorities. Sheriff Smutzer, though relieved, knew that the real work was only just beginning. Belle's arrest brought with it the promise of justice, but the complexities of the case were too vast to ignore. Belle Gunness was charged with the murder of at least 11 men, though many suspected the true body count to be far higher. The trial became a spectacle, drawing crowds from across the country. For years, Belle had been a shadow, a terrifying figure in whispers and rumors. But now she was real, sitting in a courtroom, facing her accusers. Her demeanor during the trial was chilling. Belle was calm, collected, even smug at times. She denied every charge, claiming she was a victim of a conspiracy. Her defense team argued that she had been framed, pointing to the supposed discrepancies in the body found in the fire and questioning the credibility of witnesses. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. The journal Belle had kept, the testimonies of the men who had barely escaped her grasp, the bodies found beneath the ruins of her farm. All of it painted a damning portrait. Still, whispers of doubt persisted. Could someone have planted the evidence? Could the entire town have been complicit in covering up the truth for so long? No one could say for certain. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that Belle's past was as tangled as the bodies in her wake. The impact of Belle's crimes rippled through history. Her trial brought into focus the horrifying reality that such crimes could go unnoticed for so long. The gruesome nature of her actions, the way she preyed on vulnerable men, systematically killing them and feeding them to her pigs, became the stuff of legend. But it also led to real changes in the way authorities handled serial crimes. In the wake of Belle Gunness' arrest, there was a push for better record-keeping of missing persons and for more thorough investigations of individuals with multiple disappearances in their past. Her case became a catalyst for stricter laws surrounding the sale of property, particularly regarding inheritance scams, as Belle had used her husband's death to manipulate men into falling into a web of deceit. Her story became the foundation for urban legends about the deadly widow, the woman who lured men with promises of love only to butcher them in her backyard. Beware the widow with a farm became a warning passed down for generations. Belle's name became synonymous with femme fatale and bloodthirsty criminals, inspiring countless stories in books, films, and folklore. Yet, for all the public outcry, for all the justice that seemed to have been served, a sense of unease lingered. Despite the conviction, there were troubling whispers about whether justice had truly been served. Some believed that the wrong person had been blamed. Rumors persisted that George Lamphere, the accomplice, had been involved in far more than just helping Belle dispose of bodies. There were claims that he had been the mastermind behind some of the murders, perhaps even more than Belle herself. But without concrete evidence, George's role remained a mystery. His sudden disappearance after Belle's arrest added fuel to these suspicions. Some even suggested that he had never been found because he was never truly dead, that George might have been living under an assumed name for years, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Others pointed to the possibility that Belle's death had been faked entirely, that her arrest, trial, and ultimate conviction had all been part of an elaborate ruse. Had the authorities taken the bait, or was there something deeper, something more sinister, that no one could quite grasp? And then there was Irene Johansson, the woman who had once claimed to have known Belle in Chicago. Her testimony had helped lead authorities to Belle's capture. But Irene vanished without a trace after the trial. No one ever found her, and the last known letter she had written spoke of a secret meeting with Belle before her arrest, hinting at a final, unspoken plan. Was Irene part of a greater conspiracy? Had she been silenced, or was she simply a victim, drawn into Belle's web just as many others had been? In the months following the trial, as Belle Gunness' name slowly faded from the headlines, one final piece of evidence surfaced. Something that seemed to defy all logic, something that made even the most seasoned detectives pause. A photograph, found in the personal effects of one of Belle's old acquaintances, showed a woman who looked eerily like Belle, but there was something different about her. In the photograph, Belle stood next to a man, his face obscured, but his posture and demeanor were unmistakably familiar. The image had been taken years before her crimes were uncovered, and the man beside her resembled George Lamphere. But there was more. On the back of the photograph, written in an unfamiliar hand, were 2 words: "Not finished." The cryptic message sent a shiver down the spine of every investigator who saw it. Was it a warning? A promise? Had Belle Gunness truly escaped the long arm of the law? Or had someone else been involved in perpetuating the horror she had created? As law enforcement officials scrambled to make sense of this new revelation, one thought lingered in the minds of those closest to the case. The story of Belle Gunness was far from over. And then, in the quiet corners of La Porte, rumors started to surface once more. Sightings of a woman matching Belle's description, always in places far away, always accompanied by a man who seemed to fade into the background, poured in from across the country. Some of these reports were as recent as a few months ago. Could it be that Belle, in fact, had never been caught? That the woman who had once been the terror of Lawport was still out there, still luring men with promises of love, still weaving her web of deceit? As the investigation into Belle's crimes continued, a new question began to rise to the surface. Was Belle's story truly the end of the terror, or was it only the beginning of something far darker? The report came in late on a stormy Friday night. A new body had been found, deep in the woods near a small, abandoned cabin, not far from where Belle Gunness had once lived. The body was mutilated, its bones gnawed on by what appeared to be pigs. Authorities were quick to respond, fearing that Belle's reign of terror had continued long after her capture. But when the body was identified, the horror deepened. It wasn't just any victim. It was George Lanfear's long-lost brother, the one who had been presumed dead for decades. It was impossible. George Lanfear had been dead, or so they thought, but the sight of his brother's body, covered in the same gruesome marks, forced authorities to reconsider everything. Had George truly died at Belle's hands, or had he faked his own death as part of a larger, more sinister plan? As the investigation into the latest victim unfolded, something else shocking came to light. Ray Lanfear's confession, which had been instrumental in unraveling Belle Gunness' crimes, was suddenly retracted. In a handwritten letter smuggled from his prison cell, Ray claimed that his brother George was not involved at all, and that he had been coerced into making a false confession. According to Ray, George had orchestrated everything, and Belle had only been the face of a much larger operation. The true mastermind behind the killings, Ray now stated, was someone far more powerful, far more dangerous. Ray's sudden change of heart opened a new set of questions. Who was this hidden mastermind, and what were they trying to cover up? As the police revisited old files, they discovered details that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. One officer's report, buried in the archives, described an odd exchange between two unidentified men shortly before the fire that consumed Belle's farmhouse. The men had been seen leaving Belle's property just hours before the blaze, but no one had ever questioned them. Additionally, one of the original coroners had made a cryptic note in his findings, a brief mention of a third party seen visiting Belle's farm on several occasions, someone who was never identified, and whose name had mysteriously disappeared from official records. The more the investigators dug, the clearer it became that Belle's story was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Someone or something had been working in the shadows, manipulating events and ensuring that no one had ever looked too closely at the full scope of the crimes. As the evidence mounted, a chilling theory began to take shape. Belle Gunness' killings weren't an isolated spree. They were part of a broader conspiracy, one that involved a shadowy network of criminals and corrupt officials, all working to cover up something far darker. It became increasingly likely that George Lanfear had been an unwilling pawn, manipulated into doing the dirty work for a far more dangerous figure, someone who had been orchestrating murders for years. Perhaps this mastermind had been the true source of Belle's power, giving her the resources and protection she needed to evade capture for so long. One possibility stood out among the rest: a powerful businessman from Chicago who had disappeared without a trace after Belle's supposed death. Was he part of this hidden network? Was he connected to the mysterious third party seen at the farm? Theories ranged from a hidden criminal syndicate to a corrupt political figure, someone whose influence reached into every corner of the investigation. The discovery of Ray Lanfear's retracted confession further suggested that George wasn't working alone, that Belle had been a mere puppet in a larger scheme, and the truth would never be fully uncovered until the real mastermind was exposed. As these revelations spread through the media, public panic began to take hold. The case, which had been thought to have been closed for good, was now being reopened, with dark implications for the future. Were there more Belle Gunnesses out there, hidden figures pulling the strings from behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment to strike again? In Lawport, people grew paranoid. They started locking their doors at night, installing extra locks and bolting their windows. The thought that Belle or someone like her might still be alive and still hunting, still running her schemes, became an ever-present fear. No one was safe. In neighboring towns, Rumors began to swirl that other women, seemingly innocent widows, had been seen in possession of large sums of money, wearing extravagant jewelry, or living far beyond their means. Were they part of the same network? Or was this simply a new wave of copycats, inspired by Belle's infamous legacy? Social media erupted with theories, speculations, and urban legends. Did Belle Gunness leave behind a trail of other victims? Victims whose bodies had never been found? Could she have survived the fire? Had she been operating under a different name, biding her time for the next phase of her deadly plan? The hysteria was palpable. The nation was on edge, and the public demanded answers. But the more they uncovered, the less they seemed to know. And then, just when it seemed the investigation had reached a dead end, a terrifying revelation came to light, one that ensured the case would never be forgotten. In the attic of an old Lawport farmhouse, hidden beneath the floorboards, investigators uncovered a set of journals, Belle's journals. But these weren't just her musings on the men she had killed or the way she had lured them to their doom. These journals chronicled a second phase of the plan, one that had never been investigated until now. The journals revealed a network of accomplices spread across several states, all working together to lure, kill, and dispose of victims. They hinted at a larger, more sophisticated operation that had been in place for decades, one that had quietly moved into new territories, leaving a trail of death in its wake. But the final pages were the most chilling of all. They contained a map, carefully drawn with detailed notes, showing the locations of other farms, other women, each marked with symbols that indicated they were set to inherit. The last note read simply, "The game is far from over. The harvest continues." As the investigation continued to unravel, one thing was clear. The legacy of Belle Gunness was not just a story of a single woman's crimes, but a dark, far-reaching saga that would echo through the annals of criminal history. The true scale of her terror was still beyond comprehension, and no one could say for certain where the trail would lead. Was she truly gone, or had she simply become a ghost, waiting to reappear when least expected? As the final pieces of the puzzle were laid bare, the true horror of Belle Gunness' actions became clear. The nightmare had never ended. It had only evolved. If you enjoyed this story and want to dive deeper into the mysteries of history's most chilling true crime cases, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The truth is out there, and it's more terrifying than you can imagine.